The crack of a pistol split the Arizona night like thunder breaking stone. Dust rose from Main Street as men scattered, boots pounding dirt. Leonardo Stokes froze in the doorway of the Silver Rose Saloon, his hand hovering near his hip. Behind the bar, Daniela Newman's face went pale as the sheriff's deputy kicked through the door. "Town's full up," the deputy growled, waving his revolver. "Storm's coming in hard. You two share the back room or sleep in the street. I don't care which." Leonardo's jaw tightened. He'd ridden 3 days to disappear into this nowhere town, and now fate was shoving him into a corner. Daniela's eyes darted between the stranger and the lawman. Her saloon was hanging by a thread, her husband 6 months in the ground, and the last thing she needed was trouble. "One night," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "But he sleeps on the floor." The deputy holstered his weapon and spat tobacco juice onto her clean floor. "Settled then. Storm hits in an hour. Board up tight." As the door slammed shut, Leonardo and Daniela stood in heavy silence. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She studied the stranger's weathered face, the way his eyes constantly checked the windows. If you've ever been backed into a corner with nowhere to run, then you know why staying with this story matters. Hit subscribe so we can keep bringing you tales that strike at the heart. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? But neither of them knew the real danger wasn't the storm outside. It was already standing in the room with them. Leonardo dropped his saddlebag on the worn floorboards of the small back room. 2 narrow cots, 1 lantern, walls that had seen better decades. Daniela moved to light the lamp, her hands trembling just enough to notice. "You running from something?" she asked, not looking at him. "Aren't we all?" Leonardo pulled off his hat, revealing sun-scorched hair and a scar that ran from temple to jaw. She turned then, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion written across her face. "I'm running from debt and gossip. You're running from lead." He couldn't help the bitter smile. Smart woman. 3 weeks ago he'd been framed for a bank robbery in Tucson, caught in the wrong place when his former partner decided to settle old scores. The bounty on his head was $500, dead or alive. The poster read, "They always preferred dead." "I didn't do what they say I did," Leonardo said quietly. "They never do." Daniela pulled a chair against the door. "But I'm not turning you in. Can't afford the sheriff poking around my business right now." Wind began to howl outside, rattling the shutters. Leonardo watched her face shift in the lamplight. This woman who'd buried a husband and kept fighting, who stood her ground even when the ground was crumbling. What business would that be? He asked. Daniela's hand moved to her collarbone, where a small key hung on a chain. Her eyes went distant. "Gold," she whispered. And in that moment, every loose board in the saloon began to creak as boots climbed the stairs. Leonardo's hand moved to his revolver. Daniela shook her head sharply, pressing a finger to her lips. The footsteps paused outside their door. A shadow blocked the gap beneath it. "Mrs. Newman?" A man's voice, slick as snake oil. "Sheriff Clay wants a word about your property taxes." Daniela's face hardened. She opened the door just wide enough to show her face. "Tell the sheriff I'll pay when I have it, not before." The man, a deputy Leonardo recognized from the earlier confrontation, leaned against the doorframe. His eyes slid past Daniela to where Leonardo stood. "Got yourself a boarder now. Times must be desperate." The room was empty. The storm's coming. Business is business. The deputy's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about business, ma'am. Your late husband, Thomas, he made some interesting claims before he died. Something about a vein of gold running under this very saloon." Leonardo watched Daniela's fingers tighten on the door. Her voice stayed level but barely. Thomas was fevered at the end. He said a lot of things. Maybe so. The deputy tipped his hat. But the sheriff's real curious about why you won't sell. Plenty of buyers interested in this lot. Generous offers, too. My answer hasn't changed. The deputy's smile vanished. Everything changes eventually, Mrs. Newman. Storm or no storm, this town's got eyes everywhere. You'd do well to remember that. He turned and descended the stairs, his boots echoing like a countdown. Daniela shut the door and leaned against it, eyes closed. Leonardo holstered his gun. How much of it's true? He asked. She looked at him with the weight of mountains in her gaze. All of it. Lightning flashed, and in that brief illumination Leonardo saw something that made his blood run cold. A bullet hole in the window frame, fresh splintered wood still pale. Someone shot at you, Leonardo said, moving to examine the hole. The angle was deliberate, calculated. Recently, Daniela wrapped her arms around herself. 2 days ago. Warning shot while I was closing up. Her voice cracked. Thomas didn't die from fever. He was poisoned. I know it, but I can't prove it. Leonardo's jaw clenched. He'd seen this story before in a dozen frontier towns. Land grabs, murder dressed up as natural causes, sheriffs in the pockets of men with money and no conscience. This gold, he said carefully. You've seen it? Thomas found a map. Old Spanish, he thought, maybe 200 years buried in these hills. He was going to file a claim, make it legal. She pulled the key from her neck. Then he started coughing blood. By the time I got the doctor, it was too late. Rain began hammering the roof like 1,000 angry fists. The storm had arrived with biblical fury. Daniela knelt beside one of the cots, pressing on a specific floorboard. It gave way with a soft click. Beneath it lay a leather-wrapped bundle. She pulled it out, unrolling aged parchment marked with faded ink, Spanish script, topographical markers, and a red X that marked a location impossibly close. Leonardo leaned in, his trained eye reading the terrain. This is less than a mile from here, he breathed, under the old mission ruins, where nobody goes. Daniela's hands shook. I've been too afraid to look, too afraid of what it means if it's real. Or worse, if they find out I have this. A crash downstairs made them both freeze. Then came the voice that Leonardo had prayed he'd never hear again. Leo, I know you're in here, brother. Time to settle accounts. Leonardo's face went white. Daniela saw the recognition, the fear, the anger all warring in his expression. Who is that? Jack Holloway, my former partner. Leonardo's voice was hollow. The man who framed me in Tucson. Downstairs, glass shattered. Men's laughter rose above the storm. 3, maybe 4 voices. Jack's voice rang out again, closer now. Found your horse in the stable, Leo. Still got that white star on her nose. You always were sentimental. Daniela grabbed Leonardo's arm. There's a back way, through the cellar. He'll burn this place down looking for me. Then we give him something else to look for. She thrust the map into his hands. The mission ruins. If the gold's real, it's our only leverage. The storm screamed outside, rain driving horizontal, wind tearing at shutters. This was madness, running into that hell with armed men on their heels. But Leonardo saw the steel in Daniela's eyes, the same steel that had kept her standing when her world collapsed. You trust me? He asked. I don't have a choice. Boots pounded up the stairs. Daniela pushed aside a rug, revealing a trapdoor. Leonardo pulled it open as the door to their room splinked under a heavy kick. The smell of whiskey and violence flooded in. If you've ever felt the walls closing in, with nowhere left to run except into the dark, then you understand why we keep telling these stories. They need to be heard. Subscribe. because some tales are too important to let fade. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Your presence here matters more than you know. They dropped into darkness as Jack Holloway stepped into the empty room and found the map missing. The cellar reeked of earth and old wine. Leonardo and Daniela moved through blackness, hands on damp stone walls. The storm's roar muted but still felt in the ground itself. Behind them, Jack's furious shout echoed, "Tear this place apart!" "This way," Daniela whispered, leading Leonardo through a passage she'd walked 100 times fetching bottles. They emerged behind the saloon where the desert opened up like a vast, dark mouth. Rain lashed their faces, turning the ground to mud. Leonardo grabbed her hand. "The mission's northeast. Stay close." They ran into the teeth of the storm. Lightning revealed the landscape in frozen bursts. Cactus like sentries, rock formations like broken teeth, and in the distance, the skeletal remains of Mission Santa Maria. The wind tried to tear them apart, but Leonardo's grip held firm. Gunshots cracked behind them. Jack's gang had found the exit. "They're following!" Daniela gasped, her legs burning, her lungs screaming. "Keep moving!" Leonardo pulled her behind an outcropping just as another shot whined off stone. He drew his revolver, fired twice into the storm, not to hit, but to slow them down. They stumbled forward, the mission looming closer. Its adobe walls were half collapsed, its bell tower, a broken finger pointing at God. They crashed through what remained of the entrance into a space that still held echoes of old prayers. Daniela's hands trembled as she pulled out the map. Leonardo struck a match, cupping the flame. The map's markings aligned with the mission's floor plan. The X marked a spot beneath the altar. "There," Leonardo said. They ran to the raised platform where Spanish priests once consecrated bread. Leonardo dropped to his knees, pushing aside debris. His fingers found a seam in the stone. Then the match went out, and in the darkness, they heard Jack's voice. "Found you." Leonardo spun, his revolver rising, but Jack was faster. 3 men flanked him in the doorway, guns drawn, faces ghoulish in the lightning's flash. Jack Holloway stepped forward, grinning through his beard. 4 years, Leo. 4 years you've been a thorn in my side." He cocked his pistol. "Should have let you hang in Tucson, but I wanted to see your face when I took everything." "This isn't about me," Leonardo said, his voice steady, despite the gun barrel pointing at his heart. "It's about the gold." Jack's eyes shifted to Daniela. "The widow Newman. Heard you were sitting on something valuable. Didn't believe it until I saw Leo running straight to you." He held out his hand. "The map. Now." Daniela stood, clutching the leather bundle. "This is my husband's legacy." "Your husband was a drunk who got lucky." Jack's smile turned cruel. "But luck runs out, just like his did. Strychnine in his whiskey. Went down smooth." Daniela's face crumpled with the confirmation she'd already known. Leonardo felt her pain like a knife. "You killed him for a map you couldn't even read?" Leonardo said. "Didn't have to. Sheriff Clay's been keeping me informed." Jack's revelation landed like thunder. The law itself was corrupt. "Now, the map." Leonardo's mind raced. 4 armed men, 1 shot. Daniela unarmed. The storm raging. Odds worse than Tucson. Then Daniela did something that shocked them all. She threw the map at Jack's feet and turned to the altar. "If you want gold, take it." She dropped into the opening Leonardo had found, vanishing into darkness. Jack's men rushed forward. Leonardo fired, diving after Daniela. They fell into the earth as bullets chewed stone above. They hit water, cold, swift-moving, waist-deep, an underground river, carved from limestone by centuries of flow. Daniela gasped, flailing, and Leonardo caught her, pulling her to a rocky edge. The current tugged at their legs, hungry. Above, Jack's voice echoed down. "There's a river! They went into the river!" "Let them drown," one of his men said. "Not until I see bodies! Move!" Leonardo and Daniela pushed forward, following the river's flow through a tunnel barely wide enough for shoulders. His match tin was soaked, useless. They moved by touch through absolute darkness, the water's roar guiding them forward. "Can you swim?" Leonardo asked. "Enough." Daniela's teeth chattered. "Where does this lead?" "Pray it's out." The tunnel widened. Suddenly the current strengthened, pulling them faster. Leonardo felt the drop before he saw it, heard it in the water's change of tone. "Hold your breath." They went over the edge together, plunging into a churning pool that wanted to hold them under. Leonardo kicked hard, pulling Daniela up, breaking surface in a cavern lit by cracks in the stone above. Dawn light, weak, grey, but real, filtered through. They hauled themselves onto a dry ledge, coughing, shaking. The cavern stretched before them, vast and cathedral-like. And there, against the far wall, gleamed veins of gold running through quartz, like rivers frozen in stone. "Thomas was right," Daniela whispered. "It's real." Leonardo stood dripping, staring at wealth that could change everything. But his attention fixed on something else. A seam in the rock wall, deliberate, hand-carved. He pushed, and the stone ground open. Beyond it lay more than gold. It was a spring, crystal-clear water bubbling from deep earth, more valuable than any metal in this desert hell. Then Jack's voice rang through the cavern. "Well, well." Jack and his men emerged from the tunnel, soaked, furious, guns raised. But they stopped when they saw the gold, their eyes going wide with greed. The storm's fury continued above, rain drumming through the ceiling cracks. But down here the air hung still, charged with violence waiting to break. "That's more than a vein," Jack breathed. "That's a fortune." Leonardo stepped between the gang and Daniela, his revolver steady despite the water dripping from his clothes. "You'll have to go through me. That can be arranged." Jack raised his pistol, and his 3 men followed suit, 4 guns to 1. Mathematics that didn't lie. But Daniela didn't move back. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the cavern like a blade. "You'll die of thirst before you mine an ounce." Jack laughed. "This is a river cavern, darling. Water everywhere." "That water's poisoned with arsenic runoff." She pointed to the walls. "See those white stains? My husband was a surveyor. He taught me to read rock. Drink that river and you'll die screaming." She gestured to the spring behind them. "This is the only clean water for 20 miles. The Spanish built the mission above it for a reason." The revelation hung in the air. Jack's men shifted nervously. One lowered his gun slightly. "She's bluffing," Jack said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Test it," Daniela challenged. "Drink deep." Leonardo understood then. Daniela wasn't just fighting for gold. She was fighting for the thing that could save her town, bring life back to Aspen Hollow's dying streets. The water was the real treasure. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "Doesn't matter. Dead people don't need water." Above them, a sound like the world cracking open, and tons of storm-weakened rock began to fall. The cavern ceiling collapsed in sections, rain and stone plunging down. Jack's men scattered, shouting, diving for cover. One disappeared under a boulder, his scream cut short. Another ran for the tunnel. Jack himself stumbled back, firing wild, his bullet sparking off stone near Leonardo's head. Leonardo grabbed Daniela and pulled her toward the spring opening as the world came apart. Water surged through new cracks, mixing with the river, creating a maelstrom. The gold veins vanished under cascading debris. They pushed through the spring's passage, Leonardo's shoulder slamming stone to widen the gap. Behind them, Jack's voice rose in fury and fear, then was drowned by rushing water. The mountain was taking back what men tried to steal. The passage led upward, steep and narrow. They climbed, hands bloody, lungs burning, toward a circle of grey dawn light. They burst out onto the desert floor, just as the cavern system collapsed entirely, the ground shaking, the mission's bell tower finally falling with a sound like God's judgment. Silence followed. Rain had stopped. The storm had passed. Leonardo and Daniela lay in the mud, breathing, alive, changed. When they finally stood, they saw the spring water bubbling up from new cracks, forming a clean stream that would flow toward Aspen Hollow, life running through desert. "The gold's gone," Daniela said quietly. "No, you just found something better." Leonardo looked at her, this woman who'd lost everything and refused to break. "Water rights will make you wealthy, more than gold ever could." She met his eyes and something passed between them, the recognition of two people who'd survived the same darkness and chosen light. "What will you do now?" "Help you stake your claim. Then—" He paused. "Maybe stay, if you'll have a wanted man." Daniela smiled, exhausted, hopeful. "You're not wanted anymore. Jack was the only witness, and he's buried under half a mountain." She extended her hand. "Welcome to Aspen Hollow, Leonardo Stokes." He took it, and the handshake became something more. A promise, a beginning. This story started with two strangers forced to share a room, and ended with two survivors choosing to share a future. If that touches something in you, if you believe in stories where broken people find their way to hope, then keep this channel alive. Subscribe, because every voice here matters, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your story is part of ours now. They were forced to share a room for a night. What happened next changed their lives. Sometimes that's all it takes. One night, one choice, one person who refuses to let you face the storm alone.